This is a cricket, and this is another type of cricket. Now, there is one big difference between these two. One of them is really interesting to watch, and not only watch, but observe and learn. The University of Constance, for example, is currently researching locust group behaviors to determine how swarms move. By using an alternative form of artificial reality, they can incrementally observe behavior from these animals and form a sort of copy of their neural pathways. Hi, I'm Christo Kruger. I work at the Cape Town office and spend most of my time here at BBD building React components and getting confused by JavaScript's falsy and truthy concepts. I'd like to discuss animals, artificial reality, and one of my favorite machine learning algorithms, NEAT. NEAT, like any machine learning algorithm, can help us solve complex problems, but it does it in a really clever and interesting way. It's a crossover episode between Darwin and basic statistics, with the power to grow with you as a programmer or with the needs of a client. But before we get into it, a bit of background on neural nets. A neural network, which would be used to represent these pathways, is a computational model inspired by the brain and its structure and functionality. It consists of interconnected nodes organized into layers. Each node or neuron receives input signals, processes them through an activation function, and produces an output signal. For instance, let's consider a scenario where we're using neural network to predict the behavior of the individual locusts in a locust population in different farm setups. The network may have input nodes representing factors such as humidity, temperature, crop types, and pesticide usage. By analyzing historical data, the network learns to correlate these inputs with locust behavior, enabling farmers to anticipate and mitigate locust damage. However, the flaw arises when we assume that the locust behavior remains constant over time and that our initial understanding of its neural network architecture is accurate. In reality, environmental factors, genetic mutations, or other variables may cause the locust behavior to change unpredictably. Moreover, if our model's assumption about the locust's neural network structures are incorrect, its predictions may be flawed. In a traditional neural network, the amount of input and output nodes are set, as well as the amount of layers inside of the hidden layer. These hyperparameters can be determined from observation or from study or pure guesswork. But what if we could change the amount of nodes inside the network on the fly? Would this not decrease convergence time? Now that would be neat. NEAT, or NeuroEvolution of Augmented Topologies, is a genetic algorithm for the generation of evolving artificial neural networks. It is based on applying three key techniques: tracking genes with history markers to allow crossover among topologies, applying speciation, or the creation of species, to preserve innovations, and developing topologies incrementally from simple initial structures, which it refers to as complexifying. That's a mouthful, so let's take it slow and see how it works. First, we start with an initial population. This population, whose size we set, all differ from one another and have random weighted values between their nodes, as well as random connections. Some implementations of NEAT also allow us to pick a non-default randomization function. Sorry, I skipped the part there. This population, whose size we set, all differ from one another and have random weighted values between their nodes, as well as random connections. Some implementations of NEAT also allow us to pick a non-default or randomized activation function from a set list for each node. Next, we decide on a fitness function. How do we determine when our little locusts are doing well? For the example we're using, we could go one of two ways. Either we give our buddies a fitness score based on how well they're acting like real locusts, or we give them a score based on how they would react to, based on what they would react to in the wild, such as a good score for eating food or surviving for a while, and a bad score for getting caught by predators. Once we have selected a fitness function, we can simulate how our locusts behave. At this stage, they'll mostly run around aimlessly. until one of them accidentally bumps into some food. They won't understand why this is good just yet, but maybe something in their genetics gives them the idea that being close to food is good. Maybe even eating it is better. But sooner or later, depending on your setup, the group will disappear because their generational time is up. This is where the evolutionary process in the name comes from. From a population, we select the top performers, the creme de la creme, if you will. In this example, we'll pick 2 from our initial species. Let's take a closer and rather inaccurate look at our 2 leaders, Ash and Moss. Ash was fairly good at finding food, but not so good at evading birds and the like. It could conserve its energy fairly well and is quite fast. Moss, on the other hand, was not as good at finding food, but its skills in conserving energy make up for its foraging skills. Through the magic of the algorithm, these 2 parents, as I'll refer to them, have their genes mixed. In this example, only 2 parents are present, but if we selected a few more high-performing individuals, there would be a much higher degree of genetic diversity. Nonetheless, let's continue. As we can see, these 2 parents produce 6 children, as well as 2 children that are genetically identical to one of the parents, which is done in some implementations of the algorithm to either give a baseline indication of how well the parents performed or to preserve them in case they are better at the task at hand than their children. Let's also have a look at 2 of their children, Scout and Oakley, who is no longer an orange color. This visual clue tells us something interesting. As we discussed before, NEAT is good at producing various species. When setting up the algorithm, we can also specify how distant, genetically, an individual has to be classified as a different species. It appears that Scout and Oakley are different from their siblings because they have mutated and gained a new node or neuron. Let's run a simulation one more time to see how our initial species, as well as Scout and Oakley, performed. Comparing the top 2 performers from each species, we can see that there are some things that the new species excels at and some that the old species is better at. From these 4, only 2 pairs of parents can be selected, but the original C++ implementation did allow for interspecies children, although by default, the chances of this occurring is exceptionally low, as is with nature. Now, back to the real locusts. How does the concept of NEAT and understanding locust neural pathways link? It's nice to mimic their behavior, but what value does it hold? Well, since our initial study of their behavior can give us a pretty good insight into how their brains are wired, we have a basic neural network that can reflect their decision making. What if we wanted to test how the locust will react in a change in farm design, or a new type of pesticide, or new and prolonged weather patterns due to climate change? Well, our old neural network won't give us too much insight into these changes, but NEAT can. With a starting population functional with the initial neural network, we can slowly start to change the environment around our locusts and see how they adapt to change. With an accurate enough simulation environment, we can get fairly accurate results. Further, these types of studies to determine and mimic real animal neural pathways don't stop at locusts. Studies are being done on mice as well as glass knifefish in a similar manner. While this field of study and the technology driving it is still in infancy stage, the current results are promising, and hopefully with it, more development and evolution on the NEAT algorithm. If you find the concept of NEAT interesting and want to do some further analysis, this QR code links to some useful resources, such as the original study on NEAT, a Python package that implements it, and a few other resources that show it in action. I've also added a study that compares NEAT to traditional reinforcement learning using Super Mario Brothers as a medium.